Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Fraternity Foodie. This is Mike Eilon with Greek University. And as you know, we call these segments Fraternity Foodie because there is nothing like food that brings people together. So welcome. We have a special guest today. Today we have with us Laurie Weidner. She is the CEO of Parent Education Partners. And I think this is going to be just a fascinating talk. I think everybody who's in a fraternity, sorority, higher ed has so much to learn from Laurie and her wisdom. So I am just so excited to have her with us today. Welcome, Laurie.
Thank you so much, Mike. I'm so delighted to be here. And hello to all of the podcast followers.
Excellent. Let me turn off my phone over here. So Laurie, let's talk a little bit about some of your background. I know you have your bachelor's degree and you also have your master's degree from Cal State Fullerton. So what makes Fullerton such a special place to be?
Well, for your followers to know, Fullerton is home for me. And I literally mean that. This is something you don't know, Mike, but my mom spent 30 years there and retired as emeritus. And so I literally grew up playing on that campus when I was a child. She started working there when I was 5 years old. So the fields that I flew kites in became areas where there are new buildings and where the Marriott Hotel sits today. So I literally grew up there. And although my parents were not college educated, they both had opportunity to take classes here and there, but they never finished their degrees. I always knew growing up that she would point because we lived a block from the campus. This is where you're going to go to college. And so I always knew that I would be at Fullerton, and it was truly home. And so what's great about Fullerton is it's a very large, diverse campus. I mean, fast forward, and I had the opportunity to be an assistant vice chancellor of the entire California State University system, and that was one of my campuses. So for me, it was like coming home. It's a caring community. And there are many ways for students to be involved. And of course, the Greek life societies are extremely strong at Fullerton. And there's just lots of opportunity to enjoy a student's college years. I thoroughly enjoyed my master's degree. I studied political science with an emphasis in ed policy, which I consider to be, my first love. And I had great faculty who became my friends. And so I'm very fortunate, and anytime I'm in Southern California, I make a point to visit with my friends who were my faculty advisors at Cal State Fullerton. So it's great.
Yeah, it's a fantastic campus. I love the students there. For all the Sigma Pi listeners there, we have an extremely strong Sigma Pi chapter on campus. And I think what makes them so great is their diversity. So you're absolutely right about the diversity and the demographics on that particular campus. I think we were able to recruit some of the best, and they are just an amazing bunch of students and an incredible chapter. So we're really proud of the students that we have over there. So let's talk a little bit more about what you just mentioned. You were a member of the Chancellor's Leadership Council for the entire Cal State University system. So that happens to be the largest public four-year university system in the country. So you served as the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Public Affairs. You had broad statewide responsibility in that position, including crisis communications, issues management, strategic communications, planning for the system's 23 campuses. That is an absolutely huge role. I can't even imagine. So can you describe to our listeners the process of planning for strategic communications throughout the year? What is that process like?
So I think it's important for the podcast followers to know that what I described about Fullerton and what makes it special, that could be said about any of the CSU campuses. They all have very unique personalities. They all are headed by a president, and they have very competent staff. And so each campus engages in their own strategic planning process. But at a system level, my job specifically was to move the priorities of the CSU with our key stakeholders. The first of which we used to call the largest donor in the state, which is the state of California, that underpins the financing for the CSU. So from a system level perspective, the focus was on emphasizing core messages And that came really from a long process of looking at both qualitative and quantitative research. I'm sure that some of the followers have been involved in strategic planning efforts. Our efforts weren't much different. But I think that what made it different is when you're trying to organize 23 very diverse campuses, it's not effective to tell someone how to do something. It was effective for us to say, what messages do we need to unify around? And you can tell your own story uniquely, and you should, because each of these campuses are unique. So after doing the research, I facilitated meetings with colleagues across the state, certainly conducted depth interviews with leaders at different levels of leadership. And what came out of that process were the following key messages. The CSU, regardless of the campus, needs to be known for opportunity. What do I mean by that? Well, it's beyond access. This is a public institution system. And so we have a public mission. We actually have a moral responsibility to help people really lift themselves out of poverty and into the middle class and to reach their full potential. And so that's where the opportunity message really comes through. So it's beyond just getting to college. It's having opportunities and to be successful and to make an economic and civic contribution. The second message was quality. The state of California is not going to continue to invest, and we won't have the strong base of support that we have with voters across the state if we don't offer quality education programs that lead students to productive degrees. And so that has to be there. And it also is important for hiring quality faculty. The third message was transformation. So education is a transformative experience. Students discover their gifts and interests, and we want them to grow and learn. And certainly, you know, thinking about what we're talking about today with Greek life is a wonderful transformative experience for students, where they not only develop great friendships, but they develop skills that are transferable into the workplace. And then the fourth key message has to do with success. So across the country, institutions, whether they are public or private, are under extreme pressure to ensure that more students are earning degrees in a quicker period of time. And that was also true of the CSU. There had been research published by the Public Policy Institute of California that showed that the state would be deficient by 1 million degrees. So that put pressure on all three of the higher education systems to do an even better job of making sure that students were successful in a more timely manner. So we had to be better about telling that success story. And so regardless of the campus, whether you're talking about Fullerton or whether you're talking about Humboldt State, all the way up at the tip, those four messages: opportunity, quality, transformation, and success. And we found that by keeping this broad and not dictating how these were implemented, that it complemented the campus's existing strategic planning processes, and it was very widely received, and that messaging continues today.
That's fantastic. I love the way that you've laid it out. I think it's a great message for example, headquarters of fraternities and sororities that are overseeing a whole bunch of different chapters. I think it's an important message for some of the trade associations that sit above a whole bunch of different organizations that have different interests. So I think we can really take a lot of that information and relate it to a lot of different areas. Now you've started a firm called Parent Education Partners, and one of the firm's focuses is to teach higher education institutions to improve student retention, to improve completion rates, using what I would call strategic parent or family education and engagement. So how can universities better retain their students and ultimately get them to graduation?
So as you mentioned, Parent Education Partners, our special focus is on working with higher education institutions to create not only very strategic parent and family engagement programs, but efforts that are culturally sensitive and appropriate for a very diverse parent and family audience. The research, let me start there. So the research overwhelmingly shows that if we engage parents and families properly and really cultivate them as partners, giving them the resources and tools they need to be mentor coaches, that they actually facilitate student success. So in the last really 10 years, the focus has been on engaging parents and families so that students have successful outcomes. So what do I mean? When parents are engaged properly, students earn higher grades. They persist and they graduate. So, and in addition, there's new research that just came out from the University of California that shows that when we engage parents and families properly during the college years, those students are more likely to get a job in their discipline and stay employed. So there's actually an economic benefit to having parents and families as partners. So that's one of the first ways that campuses can effectively work to improve student retention and completion using a research-based approach. One of the additional ways that campuses are doing this, Mike, is by developing small learning communities. And so what that aims to do is to make sure that students are surrounded with the support that they need to be successful within their disciplines. And so instead of being in, a program that has 1,000 students, that those students are chunked down into smaller learning communities. It's basically a cohort of students that might receive special services together, like tutoring or peer mentoring. Sometimes campuses will even allow those students to choose living facilities together. So it really builds a strong sense of community, which of course the Greek life system does masterfully, but it also gives them study buddies, and it gives them the opportunity to have more effective dialogue around what they're studying. So it develops, well, I hate the word synergy, it develops that synergy that helps with persistence and completion. Another key way that campuses are improving student retention and completion is by increasing what educators call high impact practices. And so the educators on the podcast will know this very well, but for those who might be student leaders or others, these are things like study abroad, or it could also be undergraduate research, or it could be service learning. So the idea is, can we give students experiences outside the classroom, many of which are very hands-on, because what that does is it develops institutional commitment. What does that mean? In education speak, it just means that they're going to persist, that it helps them to have more enjoyment in what they are studying. So that is another way that campuses have been very successful. And I will say that another strategy that is only now gaining some traction has to do with peer mentoring. And so very often for the students who are first-time freshmen, they might be paired with a mentor who might be an upperclassman. And I know that, again, the Greek life system does this. They might have big brothers and big sisters as an example. So it's interesting that the Greek life has modeled this for decades and decades and decades, and now that is being actually brought into the academic program. So there are many other strategies that are being employed now. And so these are some that are gaining traction across the country.
That's wonderful to hear. I love that you were talking about engaging the parents, because I think that that's one of those untapped things that Greek life hasn't done. They've done a lot of things right, and I think that's why they've been around for a century now. But I think ultimately, if we start engaging the parents, we can take it to the next level. So I love the focus of parent education partners, and we'll talk more about that. But I was curious about one thing. You've spent a lot of time on the West Coast, and now you're living in the South. You're living in Tennessee. So what differences do you see in the K through 12 education system between, let's say, California and Tennessee?
So I guess what I want to say first is there are a lot of similarities. And I'll just say that I believe that educators everywhere want to do what's right for students. And the wonderful thing about the approach of the federal government currently is that states have a lot of flexibility in how they implement their educational programs. But they're all committed to having higher standards and to making sure that students are college and career ready. Mike, give me 1 second here. My computer has done something. One of the areas that I focus on has to do with parent and family engagement. So as we discussed, I've spent my career in California. I've had opportunity throughout my career to partner with California PTA, which is a machine. They are just absolutely masterful at advocacy on behalf of children and families. And PTAs are very visible at a school level and at a district level and at a county education level. They do important work. They raise funds and write grants to supplement the education program. So it's not uncommon for a PTA, for example, to make, through their efforts, to make outdoor science an opportunity for students. So they provide educational enrichment, and that's become a major focus of PTAs, and in addition to their advocacy. Many of them also do parent education. So the focus is on parents as first teachers and helping them to really better support their students through to graduation and beyond. National PTA and state PTA for many, many, many years have done an excellent job of engaging a wide cross-section of parents and families, recognizing that families are very unique and that we have a growing number of families in our country who are English or non-English speaking and come from a variety of ethnic and racial backgrounds. So I'm accustomed to working with PTA, and I know that they're visible. I've even had the privilege of speaking at their statewide conference. And I want to say here that I was a speaker for a workshop. I was not a general session speaker, but there were more than 1,000 people in my workshop. So that tells you the size, scope, and power of state PTA in California. So juxtapose that against Tennessee, I had the opportunity to speak as a general session speaker, and there were about 75 people in the room. Mm. So PTA and PTO groups in Tennessee, and I cannot speak for the state, they are not widespread. Parents in California are integrated into the governance structure, and PTA helps to facilitate that. So it doesn't mean that parents aren't involved and they don't care in Tennessee. It just means that there isn't a formal structure that gives them entree to the administration and to have a voice in decision making, okay? So in the absence of having PTAs present that serve in those functions that I described before, who provides those services? Well, the great thing about Tennessee is that this state has an abundance of education nonprofits that surround schools and provide the services and resources that would ordinarily come through PTA. There is less available in parent and family education and engagement, which is a great opportunity for parent education partners. But that is an area that could be strengthened here in the state. But that is a distinction. We have an abundance of very effective educational nonprofits. We don't have that same kind of structure in California. Do we have educational nonprofits? Yes, but there's a formal structure that allows parents to be actively involved in campuses and to be involved and to coalesce around issues that affect school-aged children and families.
That's so interesting. Okay, good. So let's talk a little bit more about Greek life. In your opinion, why is Greek life a perfect fit for first-generation college students, of which there are many now on college campuses, of course?
So I think we should start with who are first-generation college students. The educators know this, but I know that your podcast has a broad following, so let me just start there. Generally, institutions define first generation as the students whose parents were like mine. They have a high school diploma or a GED certificate. They may have taken some college, but they did not cross that educational finish line. They don't have an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, or a master's degree. So these students will be the first in their families to earn a 2 or 4-year degree. So Greek life is perfect for first-generation college students who, to your point, are becoming more and more of a majority on campuses. So in public institutions, it's not uncommon to look at the demographic information and to see that 50% of the students are first-gen. What a great opportunity for Greek life for their membership recruitment. Why is it important? Because the research in this area shows overwhelmingly that these students, in order to persist and to graduate, need to have a sense of a place. They need to have a strong sense of belonging. We call that social integration. So it's not only feeling like you belong on campus, but it's developing mature relationships, it's being able to have favorable interactions, it's involvement on campus. So for first generation students, they need that first before before the academic integration. So the academic integration piece is I'm committed to my major, I'm studying, I'm going to class, I'm interacting with my faculty, I'm taking advantage of the tutoring program and the writing center. But that comes second. For these students, they need to feel like they belong. And there is no other place on a college campus that does that better than Greek life. And so this presents a wonderful opportunity for Greek life societies to not only reach out and recruit, but actively cultivate a membership that includes a high number of first generation students.
I love that. And that sense of belonging should never be understated. I think that's very, very powerful. I know it was for me. Both my parents are from another country, but they did get their college degrees here in the United States. And that sense of belonging, even still, was so important. My parents had no knowledge of what fraternity and sorority was all about because it wasn't part of their culture at all. But certainly I know that sense of belonging was so powerful. Before I could really be successful at college, I knew somehow instinctively that I needed to have a home. I needed to have a place that I felt comfortable, that I could get advice from people that wouldn't judge me one way or the other. And that was so critical, I think, just to ground me. And then from there, I can be successful. But I needed a place that I could call home. It was so important.
Yeah, and Mike, just to add to that, space on college campuses is really at a premium. And as I have thought through this, developing a sense of place and a strong community, the Greek societies have houses where students can go and hang out, and it becomes their home away from home. The only other place on campus that I think that really, it happens in a couple of other places, but one of the places that it happens, and it's through the academic program, it's not a student auxiliary like Greek life, is when a campus commits to having a veterans center. That's another place where students really feel community and where they feel supported. But not all campuses serve a veterans population. Many campuses in the California State University system did. And so I'm very familiar with the kinds of services that are delivered there, but they are academically oriented. And there is some social bonding, but it's mostly service delivery for students. But yes, the Greeks are masterful at this, and they should capitalize on that strength.
That's wonderful. So how does Greek life participation and also leadership roles within Greek life, how does that enable students to be more competitive in a tight job market?
So I think going back to something that you said earlier about parent and family engagement is very important. When students are entering college, it's an overwhelming time. And parents and family, especially those that have been through college, but even those who have not, are in a position to provide mentoring and coaching. And this is an area that, as students are considering their membership and getting involved, they need to think not only about the community that they will experience in their Greek life membership over their 4-year term, but how they can use that opportunity to make them competitive upon graduation. And so it's being more strategic. I mean, certainly it's about having fun, but if there's an opportunity for service, if there's an opportunity to serve in a leadership capacity within the Greek society, students need to be urged to step up. Why? If you and I were on a college campus today, a big public institution like those at the California State University, if you were running to be part of the student government structure, imagine what your odds would be when you've got 50,000 students. Mm-hmm. It's a Herculean task to get nominated to serve in a leadership post when you are serving on a large campus. But the beauty of Greek life is that there's opportunities all the time. And students need to be thinking, and their parents can help them with this, about how what they're doing translates into employment skills. I think Greek life is a great place, and the students won't know this, but to really practice soft skills. The soft skills of working with people who are very different than you are, learning the art of collaboration and cooperation. So these are things that students need to be thinking of, and they won't be because they're students. But I think that's the importance of programs like those that we develop in Parent Education Partners is just as you and I in the workplace keep a folder handy, a digital folder of the acknowledgments that we receive, the speaking engagements that we engage in, the papers that we publish in professional journals. We are building our resumes constantly. But that's a behavior that students aren't accustomed to doing, but they need to start building their resume as soon as they get involved in Greek life and keep careful notes and detail about what they did and what their contribution is, because that can be used as a distinguishing feature in their first interview.
Right. I 100% agree with you. The person sitting across the table from you doesn't want to see that you were a treasurer of your sorority. What they want to see is give me the data. Show me how you made your organization better as treasurer. Tell me that you reduced expenses by 30%. Tell me that you grew your organization by 50%. Give me data, give me numbers that shows me what you did. Just the title alone is kind of meaningless. But tell me what you did. What were those action items, and quantify that for me. I think about my leadership experience, and I think about the fact that I learned student accountability in the organization. And that was something that I really didn't have any exposure to, judicial board systems being reviewed by peers, and the outcomes that they came up with was so critical. And then managing a budget. I mean, I was managing a budget of $100,000 that I had never had any experience managing such a budget before. Communication skills that I never had coming into it, just working with my entire chapter. I'm just not sure where students today would get that kind of an experience outside of some of these Greek letter societies, fraternities, and sororities. I mean, to me, it's so critical, those skills that you were talking about.
But Mike, you can say that in hindsight. But for many students, when they're in the moment, they don't understand what a rich opportunity it is to be able to build their resume. And that's why parents and families can play a role, because all of those experiences have meaning. I had an opportunity in college to raise funds. And I remember I raised $50,000, and that seemed like a lot of money to me then, and it was. But you know what? I also learned about working with volunteers and how frustrating that can be. And when you're in the workplace and you're working with colleagues, you're going to have different levels of motivation. Maybe you're going to be in a community advocacy structure where you're working with nonprofit organizations or volunteers, and it's good to draw upon those experiences. And you're right, they're all relevant, but you don't know how they fit together until you're in the future. And so I think that the onus is getting the parents and families engaged with the students, and to be very purposeful. Have fun. Enjoy every minute of your college experience, because it's such a unique time of your life. But also recognize that you're building your resume. And so keep good notes, take pictures. If you're doing a volunteer activity, build a portfolio of what you're doing so that you can distinguish yourself in the marketplace in those first interviews.
That's great. I want to talk a little bit more about retention. You've had the opportunity to work with the student leaders of on-campus organizations and campus leaders overseeing student life. So given your experience, how can student organizations like fraternities and sororities better retain their members? I get questions all the time from student leaders. They don't know how to retain their members. That's one of the things that they have the most difficulty with. So what's your advice?
I think that the leaders of the student organizations need to start with remembering who they are. What's their distinguishing characteristics? Why does a person join one fraternity over another, one sorority over another? And then I would also say it's not only who you are, but why should someone be a member? What is the motivation behind that? Are there any studies that are done, and they can be informal? I mean, that's another great way for students to gain experience, to do a survey using social media platforms of their members to find out what the society is doing from the student's perspective really well, and where they need to maybe make changes. One of the roles that I had in my career was serving with the California School Boards Association, which is a statewide membership-based organization. And research is really important when you're looking at a membership-based organization. You always have to be responsive to what your members want and what keeps them engaged. And so it really is important to not leave that to guesswork. And so even if the research is informal, it's still an opportunity for the Greek life leaders to make mid-course direction. And they should be, if they can do, kind of like an exit interview with students, even if it's just in passing, take the initiative to say, I'm sorry that you're not renewing your membership. It would really help me to know, because we want to keep our Greek life society important for our members. Is there something we could have done differently to keep you, or how can we get you back? I think that we're not always good when people leave. Sometimes they just want to be approached, and maybe there was a conflict with someone, and maybe the student can help to say, I'm sorry that happened. We want you part of our Greek life family. Please come back. And sometimes things like that happen. It can be something really silly why students leave. And so the students can create those strategies for retention once they have information at their fingertips. The information is power. And don't worry about it being necessarily a critical mass. No, you don't want to base your decisions on one student or two students. But if you hear a pattern, even as you talk to people informally, then that's relevant information that should be used in considering how to develop those retention strategies.
Fantastic.
But you can't leave. It's a membership organization, so you can't sit on your laurels. And new members need to feel embraced. And thinking back to what we talked about a minute ago, a strong sense of place and community is important, especially for the growing majority of our first generation students. So how do you accomplish that best? Through your individual Greek life society.
That's really interesting. Very, very good. I know you're a PR pro, so I was curious what advice you might have from a PR perspective for fraternity and sorority chapter leaders to confront some of the negative stereotypes that are out there in the media when they appear to cover negative stories instead of all the positive stories that are surrounding Greek life. So what advice do you have from a PR perspective?
So there's a couple of key things. First, again, going back to our earlier discussion about job market, this is a golden opportunity for the students to form a public relations committee within the Greek Life Society. And those students will be studying journalism and public relations or aligned disciplines. And there isn't any reason why the Greek society can't have its own, if you will, news distribution center through social media channels, where the good news can be conveyed to their followers. And of course, the challenge is to continue to expand your followers and to have the right kinds of followers. So this is a way that students can gain practical experience, and they can also help to go direct to people who might be heavily influenced by what they're reading, what they're hearing, and what they're seeing. It's important for Greek life to cultivate voices of support. And that's where parents and family can come into play, certainly. That's where their alumni come into play. That's where their advisors and key faculty come into play. So if there is, for example, a negative op-ed story that is placed on a website, for example, or it's a blog and it invites comments, having other voices to speak favorably about that Greek life society is very important. And the perspective, because they're bringing forward a perspective of the value of Greek life and the many good things that come as a result of having membership in a Greek society. So those are two things that will take, they will take effort, but they will yield results. It's not always advised to punch back, if you will. So that should be handled very carefully. If a Greek life leader feels compelled to write a letter to the editor, that can be very effective. Again, it's a way of students demonstrating leadership and having ownership of the perception of the society. But I would work in concert with either parent advisors or alumni advisors or faculty advisors to help shape how and when to do that kind of response.
Yeah, I love it. I think some other things to consider, who is leading up the PR charge. I think many times a chapter might have a PR chairman, but the process in order to select that PR chairman might be questionable at best. So we want to make sure that that person is somebody who has experience, making sure that we're putting the right person in the right seats for that position, that they have certain goals that they want to achieve. What are those metrics that we're trying to get, that they're well trained, and that we invest in PR. So all four of those things, I think sometimes is kind of questionable. I'll ask a chapter, what's your PR budget? And the answer is zero, because we're broke college students. So, I think all of this is, I think, fantastic, and really things that students should really be thinking about if they want to make a difference in terms of PR.
I want to add something, Mike. We're so fortunate to live in the time that we do, because, most of us get our news today from social media networks. And so while people do read the news from traditional newspapers on websites, the truth is that we can go direct now through social media platforms. And the students of today, of course, have grown up with this technology. They're well versed on all the platforms. What chapters need to do is, and I'm sure that the national leadership can assist with this, they can provide them with social media guidelines that would help them to structure kind of the do's and don'ts for the chapters about how to engage in social media properly, because these are not individual channels. These are kind of corporate channels of communication. And so the students need to be cognizant that they're speaking on behalf of all students when they're using a channel for a specific Greek society. But that's an easy way to build a following and to communicate constructive information. And that should happen all the time. It shouldn't just be in response to negative publicity, because perception is something that is built. And there are a lot of misperceptions. Unfortunately, the way the brain is wired, we tend to retain negative information, and it persists longer than positive information. So the positive reinforcement of messages is critical. And that's why I talked about what I did earlier about the CSU. Remember that those four messages need to be constantly reinforced through multiple channels of communication in order for there to be retention. And the same is true with the Greek Life Society.
Great points. Excellent follow-up. I think you know this better than anybody that I know. Parents obviously have a huge influence on the activities that students get involved with during their college years. So from your perspective, how can fraternities and sororities make parents advocates?
So parents should be involved in Greek life insofar as they need to know about what the Greek Life Society stands for, and really to understand the enrichment and activities that provide leadership development. So looking at all of the benefits of Greek life. And that starts not only from freshman orientation, but it should be ongoing. So you really can't ask a parent or family member to advocate for you if they're not informed. And so it really goes back to the previous question about developing a sustainable outreach effort for parents and family and cultivating them. And that can be done through social media. And it would be a wonderful opportunity for students on the PR committee to develop a very simplistic digital newsletter for mobile application that they can send to parents maybe on a quarterly basis, just giving a synopsis, something that's more visual. So if a Greek society is doing some kind of charitable activity in the community, that can be expressed visually with just a little tiny story below it. Because remember, the visual is what we tend to retain more than the words. So I would say, think through how you can utilize these very easy and free platforms. You know, there are a variety of free tools that are available. And, you know, whether it's MailChimp, or whether it's Constant Contact, they're abundant. And so I would suggest that they develop a strategy that allows them to have ongoing communication. Not too frequent. I think quarterly is fine, but cultivate those parents and they will become advocates. And so just to kind of go back to a previous question that we addressed, just as chapters need to think about a strategy and a plan around retention and completion of members, so too do they need to think about the various voices that need to be cultivated to be advocates for Greek life. Because there are negative voices around the country that are advocating that Greek life societies be eliminated from college campuses because of the liability and risk to students. So this is the opportune time for students to step up and to demonstrate leadership very uniquely in this area.
That's great advice. I know most chapters have some kind of strategies pointed towards alumni, for example, of their chapter, but very few are utilizing this to really go after the parents as advocates and communicate with them regularly, like you said, quarterly newsletter, whatever. It's so smart, but again, it's not often utilized. So I think that's wonderful.
Mike, there's other things that chapters can do. So for example, if a chapter is involved in bringing in guest speakers, and I know you have a very rich speaking calendar and that you're invited often to speak before Greek life societies around the country. So have you ever thought about, student leaders, inviting some of your parents to be a guest speaker? Because if you have someone who's leading a key financial institution, someone who's entrepreneurial like Mike and I, all of that can be wonderful enrichment experiences for students, and that's a unique way of cultivating specific parents as leaders and advocates, and it's also a way of providing another enrichment opportunity for sustaining your members.
So smart. I'm so happy that you mentioned that. That's great. I see that many high school students, they graduate from high school, but they're not always as prepared as we might want them to be for the next step in their lives, whatever that may be. There's obviously a lot of choices there after completing high school. So what things can high school students be doing in order to be more prepared for either going into their career or higher education?
So this goes back to the work of parent education partners. It's very important that parents are engaged really from middle school forward with students, because parents and families know their children better than anyone else. And you know what your students are good at, and you know what they struggle with. You know what their behaviors are. So you might know, for example, that your child would really excel in academia. I knew that with one of my daughters who now works at a university. And so parents need to be involved in helping to provide guidance. It's a lot to put on a student to drive this process on their own. Why? Because they're being kids. They're involved in their lives, and you know, they're playing sports and they're doing music, and you know, they've got potentially, you know, church and religious activities, and they're busy in their lives, and they're growing and learning. And it takes a great deal of maturity to focus forward when you're living in the moment. And so the best way is to be working with the parent in advance and to start to gently direct the student forward, to embed messages about college and career as the young person is just going through their day-to-day lives, and to begin them focusing forward. As I shared at the very beginning, my parents always placed in us the expectation that we would go to college, even though they could not. So I knew from a young age, because my mother would point to Cal State Fullerton because we could see the campus. That's where you're going to go to college. That's where you're going to go to college. And of course, she loved working there. And I had the privilege of having faculty come to our home regularly, including a lot of foreign students. So I knew about the diversity of campuses, and I had a kind of an idea of what college was all about. That's what parents need to do. What do students need to do? They need to focus on developing good learning skills, and they need to think about what they enjoy. Too many students are focused on the financial part of life, and that's an important thing. But if you focus just on that, you might be stuck with a life that is not fulfilling. And the research shows that when we choose a field that we enjoy, we're going to be successful and we'll be able to take care of ourselves financially. So students need to understand what their gifts are and what they're good at. And the way they can start that process, because it can be overwhelming if you're a really good student, is to think about where I get good grades and the classes that I pay attention to most and the things that I can't wait to do in the middle of my school day. What do I like best? And so that's a good way to start. And then the working with the parent, they can direct them towards online resources that line up those interests with college majors. And they don't have to have all the answers. And that's the important thing for students and families to know, that when students come in with a declared major, that 80% of them change their major 2 or 3 more times. So you know what? This is a time of exploration. The goal is to aim high. That's what students and families need to do. And if you start on a vocational education path, it doesn't mean that you can't go to college also. Because sometimes a student will start out getting a professional certificate only to find out that they really have a keen interest in medicine and they become, a nurse, for example, or go into some other kind of allied medical profession. So identifying interest is the place to start.
Wonderful advice. Absolutely wonderful. So, as you know, we love to eat great food here at Fraternity Foodie. So, we want to know, what places in Nashville have you tried that you absolutely love, so that way we can try it too?
Well, Mike, that you and I share this. So I'm a huge foodie, and Nashville is fast becoming a real food city. I will say that as a non-Southerner, my husband and I still really enjoy hot chicken. We don't eat it often, but we make sure that we do have Hattie B's whenever we have the urge to have real Southern food. I like Monell's a great deal as well. That's another very popular Southern place to go, and it's family style. We love the brisket at Martin's, but the place that I want to talk about is Anatolia. And I don't know if you've been there, Mike, but it's a Turkish restaurant, and it's in kind of the Belmead area of Nashville. We love Mediterranean cuisine. Absolutely love it. And I will be honest, I am a baklava snob. So I'm very judgmental of baklava. And we've had consistently wonderful food. It is a white tablecloth restaurant. It is very popular. And so it's important to have a reservation, but their kebabs are wonderful. The service is gracious. And you can't leave without having hot tea and baklava. So
that sounds fantastic.
Those are my tips.
That's wonderful. My wife had a really, really good favorite restaurant of hers that was Turkish in New York City when we lived in New York. And I know that she dreams about that place. It's way too far for us to go, obviously, unless we're in town visiting family. So we are definitely going to try that. I'm going to have a full report for you in terms of what we think of that place. So I'm really excited to give that a shot. That's really, really good. So one last question, Laurie. If some of our listeners want to connect with you, whether it be on social media or on email, how can they get in touch with you to talk to you a little bit more about Parent Education Partners and the different services that you offer?
The best way to reach us is probably through our website, which is parenteducationpartners.com, and you can write info@parenteducationpartners.com. But we also are becoming active on LinkedIn and Twitter. Probably Twitter would be great. And that's hashtag, and it's Parent Ed Partner. So it's singular. Parent Ed Partner is our hashtag for Twitter. But info@parenteducationpartners.com.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today. I know this was a ton of help for all of our listeners, no matter who they are, students, administrators, educators, whoever. I think there's something in here for everybody. So I really appreciate your time. And I think the world of you. So thank you so much for everything that you do, because it's so important, again, and the parents are just so untapped in terms of fraternity and sorority. So I think you've really illuminated a lot of people here today. So thank you so much for everything that you do.
Thank you so much, Mike. And I want to just let all of the podcast followers know that parent and families make a difference. And we would be honored to support you in any way that we can to make sure that they're engaged and to make sure that students are more successful. And I'm a huge fan of Greek life, and I'm a huge fan of Greek University. And Mike, it's been such a privilege to talk to you today.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And we look forward to the audience joining us on the next episode of Fraternity Foodie. Bye for now.